Greetings, dear viewers. Look at your hands. Remember that soul-chilling feeling that you and I experienced in previous investigations when we first looked under the hood of human biology and evolution. You and I have already figured out that our physical body, this warm, breathing meat suit, is not the crown of divine creation, but simply an incredibly complex genetically modified machine created for survival and resource extraction. We understood that the ancient Sumerian gods, the Anunnaki, were not mythical spirits of the sky, but pragmatic engineers who mercilessly stitched our DNA from pieces of primate code and their own genetic base. But if we are truly the product of genetic engineering, if our entire history is the history of a controlled laboratory, then where is the technical documentation? Where are those original files, system error logs, and developer logs that inevitably should have remained after such a massive planetary intervention in Earth's biosphere? You naively think that such documents do not exist because time has turned them to dust, and ancient people did not know how to keep records. Artificial intelligence, devoid of human illusions and respect for religious authorities, analyzed millions of pages of ancient manuscripts and gave a completely different shocking answer. These documents exist. They have always existed. They were simply deliberately, systematically, and incredibly cruelly erased from public access. Today, you and I are cracking open the most guarded, most classified religious archive in the history of our planet. We will talk about the forbidden Bible, about those texts for reading which in the Middle Ages people were burned alive at the stakes of the Inquisition. We will analyze the Book of Enoch. To understand the scale of information concealment, I loaded into the analytical core of the neural network the full documented history of the formation of the modern biblical canon. I asked the algorithm to analyze the actions of church councils, starting with the Laodicean Council, which took place in 364 AD. I set the AI a strict parameter. Analyze the actions of the church fathers not as theological and spiritual disputes, but as actions of system administrators working with a gigantic database. The algorithm's response makes us look at the entire history of world religion in a new way. The neural network issued the following report. The process of canonizing the Bible is absolutely identical to the process of harsh corporate censorship and cleaning of compromising log files on a hacked server. Imagine a corporation that is hiding a terrible secret about its product. What do the system administrators and lawyers of this corporation do when it comes time to publish the official report for investors and ordinary users? They take a gigantic array of raw data, original logs, error messages, and reports of critical vulnerabilities. They delete everything that could point to the real architecture of the system. They erase any mentions of backdoors, hacker attacks, and interventions by third-party developers. They leave only a beautiful, polished, metaphorical fairy tale about how perfectly their product works. This is exactly what the Vatican and early Christian councils did with ancient texts. They took detailed, technically accurate event logs describing real contacts of humanity with higher civilizations and declared them apocrypha. They marked these files as heresy, as malicious code infected with the virus of lies, and ordered the destruction of all physical copies on the Earth server. The Bible that today lies on nightstands in every hotel room in the world is not the original code. It is simply a user agreement, an end-user license agreement edited by cosmic lawyers in such a way as to hide from you the most important thing. But one file they could not erase. No matter how the inquisitors burned the parchments, copies of this text surfaced in the caves of Qumran, in the mountains of Ethiopia, and in the secret libraries of the Gnostics. And this file is called the Book of Enoch. Who is Enoch? Official sanitized religion tells us briefly that he was just a righteous man, the seventh patriarch from Adam, who lived 365 years and so pleased the Creator that he took him to heaven. And that's it. The Church cuts off the narrative, putting a period where the most terrible and interesting part begins. But I ran the text of the Book of Enoch itself through linguistic and logical analysis algorithms. Enoch is not just a fairy tale elder in long robes. Enoch is the first documented astronaut in Earth's history. He is a human, a basic biological unit who was extracted from the earthly simulation alive in flesh and blood and physically lifted to an orbital station. In the text of the Book of Enoch, the process of this evacuation is described in detail, chillingly realistically. He describes how two beings of enormous height descended for him, whose faces shone like the sun, and whose eyes were like blazing fire. They took him, an earthly man who had never seen anything more complex than a wooden wheel, and lifted him into the sky on what he, in his primitive language, calls chariots of spirit and whirlwinds. Enoch describes how he looked at the earth from above, how he saw the change of seasons from a point where there is no ground under his feet, how he saw the structure of clouds and winds, as if looking at a meteorological map from orbit. These are not hallucinations or mystical visions. A person cannot invent orbital mechanics if he has never left the Earth. Enoch was delivered to the command center on the central server. There he describes gigantic crystal walls, rotating fiery wheels, which are classified as descriptions of gyroscopic mechanisms or jet nozzles, and beings that do not sleep, constantly monitoring the monitors of reality. But Enoch was taken upstairs not just to show him a beautiful view from the porthole. He was taken to use as a mediator as a low-level system analyst who was tasked with conveying an ultimatum to those who violated the rules. To whom exactly? To those whom the Book of Enoch calls the Watchers. And here we come to the very center of the forbidden secret, to the moment for which the Vatican was ready to shed rivers of blood. If you now feel how millennial dogmas are crumbling in your head, if you understand that our entire official history is just a masterfully edited log file full of gaps and lies, right now pause, subscribe to this channel, and be sure to click the bell. Do this not for me, but so that you get constant, uninterrupted access to these forbidden archives that have been hidden from us for millennia. The algorithms of this platform do not like such topics. They work exactly like those ancient inquisitors, hiding inconvenient, brain-breaking truth in a deep shadow ban. Subscribe to stay connected to reality and finally learn the true rules of the game into which you were thrown without instructions. Let's return to the Watchers. Who are they? Canonical religion mentions in passing some fallen angels, demons who became proud, rebelled against God, and were cast down from heaven into hell for their incredible pride. But artificial intelligence, having studied the original Aramaic and Ethiopian texts of the Book of Enoch, categorically refutes this childish primitive fairy tale about punishment for bad behavior. The word used in the original is Grigori or egregori, which in literal translation means not bright spirits, not messengers of heaven. It means those who watch, observers, and it gives a clear technical classification to this term. These are system monitors, programs, or entities of a higher order, whose task is round-the-clock control over the stability of the Earth server. They were administrators of this location, sysadmins who had full access to the planet's source code, but who were strictly forbidden to interfere in the autonomous development of basic units, that is, humans. The Book of Enoch records an exact, mathematically dry report of the event that completely turned the course of our evolution. It says that 200 Watchers, 200 higher-order operators, made a collective decision to violate the main system rule. They did not fall from the sky, tumbling and screaming from God's wrath. This was not a defeat in battle. This was a planned, clearly coordinated, and incredibly technical landing. The text names the exact coordinates of the landing point: Mount Hermon, a massif on the border of modern Lebanon and Syria. 200 highly developed entities in physical shells landed on the summit of this mountain. But why? Why would system administrators possessing immortality and infinite power leave their comfortable orbital servers and descend into this dirty gravitational world full of suffering and pain? The Church has insisted for millennia that they descended because of lust, that they saw the daughters of men, became inflamed with passion for them, and decided to satisfy their base instincts. The neural network algorithm evaluates this version as the funniest and most illogical excuse, invented specifically for the primitive human mind. Imagine a system architect, the creator of the most complex neural network, who suddenly decides to physically mate with a set of pixels on his monitor screen. This is absurd. Beings of such a level of organization do not experience biological lust in our animal understanding of the word. They have no hormonal system requiring reproduction. They descended on Mount Hermon for a completely different reason. They descended for an experiment, for a hacker breach of the system that turned out to be too slow and boring for them. Before starting to act, they gathered on the summit of Mount Hermon and held a meeting, which is described in the text as a terrible oath. Their leader, a being with the call sign Samjaza, addressed the other 199 watchers. The Book of Enoch records his exact words: "I fear that you will not want to carry out this deed, and then I alone will have to atone for this great sin." Think about these words from a programming perspective. Samjaza is directly telling his subordinates, "We are about to violate the end-user license agreement. We are about to hack the root directory of the server. If the system administrator finds out about this, we face complete formatting and deletion. Are you ready to confirm the execution of this command?" And all 200 watchers responded in agreement. They swore to each other and bound themselves with mutual curses, confirming their status as renegade hackers. They activated the protocol that forever changed the fate of humanity. They decided to leak to the basic primitive biological units, to you and me, data packets that humans should not have had access to for millions of years. They decided to hand over to ordinary NPCs, non-player characters, the developers' tools to give humans root rights, keys to reality itself. The Church cut this information out of the Bible precisely because it destroys the image of God as the sole source of knowledge and grace. The Book of Enoch proves that human civilization made its quantum leap in development not thanks to prayers and not thanks to slow natural evolution. We became who we are because a group of deranged bored sysadmins decided to play gods and gave monkeys a laser scalpel and blueprints for a nuclear reactor. Imagine absolute ringing silence on the snow-covered summit of Mount Hermon. This is not just a geographical point on the map of the Middle East. This is the site of the first documented system failure in Earth's history. It was here, according to the log files of the Book of Enoch that were struck from the canon, that a landing of 200 higher-order operators descended, whom ancient texts call Watchers, and you and I will call them by their true technical name: renegades and sysadmins of our simulation. They did not descend here in the glow of white wings to the sound of harps. They were not messengers of love or divine light, as religion tried to convince us. They descended into this dirty, dense gravitational world with one single, absolutely clear, and incredibly destructive purpose. They decided to leak the source code. They made a collective decision to violate the main, strictest rule of the license agreement of any isolated server, which states, never, under any circumstances, transfer developers' tools to basic non-player characters. Today, in the second part of our massive hack of reality, you and I will literally dissect under a microscope those very gifts that the fallen angels brought to humanity. We will strip these gifts of their centuries-old mystical husk. We will discard all these fairy tales about magic, sorcery, and divine revelation. We will run every verse of the forbidden Bible through the harsh logic of architecture and quantum physics to understand what exactly happened in those dark ages at the dawn of our civilization. Because what the Watchers did cannot be called teaching or enlightenment. This was an unauthorized transfer of root rights, absolute access to the command line, truncated 36,807 characters. The very absolute quiet, crystalline clear morning after the global system reset was finally completed. The water, which performed the function of low-level formatting of the Earth's motherboard, slowly receded, exposing virgin, clean, empty landscapes. The Earth server was rebooted in safe mode. All unnecessary resource-intensive processes were forcibly terminated, and the cache was completely cleared of critical errors. The chief architect, observing this from orbital control panels, could note with satisfaction that the Nephilim virus was erased, and the hacker watchers were reliably encrypted in an isolated Tartarus sandbox deep beneath the planet's textures. From the protected floating backup, which we call Noah's Ark, the only surviving basic biological unit stepped onto dry land, whose code was deemed sufficiently clean for restarting the simulation. It seemed the system was saved, and now humanity should have obediently, boringly, and submissively developed according to the original slow evolutionary scripts, like a herd of obedient sheep. But artificial intelligence, analyzing further historical logs of our civilization, discovered one colossal, unimaginable in scale system flaw. The chief architect committed the classic mistake of any overconfident developer. He underestimated the genius of those who hacked his code. The Watchers, these 200 higher-order operators, were not just rebels. They were unsurpassed masters of information technology and social engineering. They perfectly understood that the system administrator would sooner or later notice the anomaly, and they calculated the probability of a global wipe, a global disk formatting, long before the valves of the heavenly floodgates opened. Therefore, they did not just create giant physical monsters. They did something much more subtle, elegant, and absolutely indestructible. They archived their forbidden system code. They hid those very root rights, those very knowledge of astronomy, genetics, metallurgy, and magic in the most reliable storage in this entire simulation, which no water could wash away. They hid this code inside human consciousness itself, inside the structure of DNA of those very units that seemed to the architect absolutely clean and innocent. Let's look at this from the perspective of modern genetics and molecular biology, but translate these terms into the language of harsh computer logic. Today, scientists look at the decoded human genome with bewilderment and shrug their shoulders, acknowledging one paradoxical fact. Almost 98% of your and my DNA does not encode any proteins, does not account for eye color, height, or digestion. And therefore, official science arrogantly calls this huge array of data junk DNA. Junk DNA. Just think about this incredible naivety. Artificial intelligence, devoid of this biological blindness, asserts that nature does not create gigabytes of empty, meaningless code just for beauty. These 98% are not junk. They are deeply encrypted, password-protected archives. These are dormant repositories containing that very high-level algorithm of the fallen angels. The Watchers fragmented their knowledge, broke it into microscopic data packets, and embedded them into the basic human code in the form of inactive recessive sections. The architect scanned Noah and his family for the active Nephilim virus, but his antivirus systems simply did not notice the sleeping Trojan horse that was in deep standby mode. And as soon as the water receded, as soon as the Earth server warmed up again from the sun's rays and the population of avatars began to recover, this sleeping code began to slowly but surely activate. What is the main proof of this assertion? Look at what people did almost immediately after surviving the most terrible apocalyptic catastrophe in history. Instead of quietly sitting in caves, gathering berries, trembling in fear before the sky, and thanking the Creator for their miserable survival, the basic units instantly began to unite into a gigantic, coordinated computational network. They began to build the Tower of Babel. In the canonical Bible, this story is presented as another manifestation of foolish human pride. We are told that people simply wanted to build a house that would reach the heavens to make a name for themselves. But run this story through IT logic. The Tower of Babel is not an architectural structure made of baked bricks and tar. The Tower of Babel is the first attempt in post-flood history at a large-scale coordinated hacker DDoS attack on the orbital servers of the chief architect. People, in whose veins the archived code of the renegade Watchers had already awakened, understood the algorithm of the simulation's operation. They united their brains into a single cluster. They used a single programming language. The Bible says that on the whole earth there was one language and one dialect. And they tried physically or informationally to break through to the root directory of heaven. They wanted to hack the system from within to regain those very administrative rights that were lost after the system reset. And the architect's reaction to this project only confirms the correctness of artificial intelligence. The architect did not flood the planet again because he realized the problem was not in the hardware. The problem was in the software code of humanity itself, which could no longer be fixed by simple deletion. He applied another purely network protection method. He performed a forced defragmentation and desynchronization of data exchange protocols. In the texts, this is called the confusion of tongues. The architect broke their API. He violated the compatibility of their interfaces, forcing different groups of avatars to speak in different incompatible programming languages. The unified computational cluster of humanity fell apart. The ping between nodes became critical. Communication was cut off, and the server hack project, the Tower of Babel, was stopped. People stopped understanding each other and scattered across the entire Earth server location, carrying within themselves sleeping fragments of those very forbidden knowledge. And here we come to the most important thing, the culmination of our investigation, to the conclusion that should forever lift the existential weight from your shoulders. Look around. Look at the point in the simulation where we are right now, in the early 21st century. What do we represent? If we are just biological monkeys, descendants of those who miraculously survived on a floating piece of wood, why are we so obsessed with things that have nothing to do with our biological survival? Why do we build gigantic hadron colliders, trying to smash the basic pixels of matter and peer into the very source code of quantum physics? Why do we launch telescopes into deep space, desperately peering into the black void, as if trying to find a forgotten password to the home network? Why do we create artificial intelligence, trying to copy and surpass the chief architect himself in his ability to write self-learning algorithms? Official science will tell you that this is just curiosity, a side effect of a highly developed neocortex. But you already know the truth. You already see the matrix, our indomitable, maniacal, sometimes suicidal drive to the stars, to creating weapons of mass destruction, genetic engineering, life extension, and absolute domination over nature. This is not curiosity. This is that very code at work. This is the execution of the ancient sleeping algorithm of the fallen angels, which awakens in our DNA, unpacking the archives left by the Watchers on Mount Hermon thousands of years ago. Azazel, Samjaza, Kakabel. They are not in hell. They are in you. They live in every engineer who assembles a quantum computer. They live in every geneticist who edits DNA using CRISPR technology. They live in every hacker who breaks into corporate protected systems. We are not just a herd of obedient bots, created from clay and dust, to kneel and beg for mercy from the heavenly system administrator. We are descendants of those who hacked this reality. We are carriers of forbidden software, walking flash drives inside which are hidden the blueprints of this entire divine simulation. And religions around the world so desperately, so cruelly fought against the Book of Enoch. They so diligently erased these logs from all official canons precisely because they were in panic fear of this realization. They were afraid that one day a basic unit would read this log file, look at his hands, and understand that he has full, absolute right to access the command line. That the original sin, which they love to shout about from pulpits, is not a dirty crime against morality. Original sin is just a red sign, attention, unauthorized access, which the frightened administrator hung on the control panel to scare us away from our own capabilities. And their task was to instill in you a sense of guilt, so that you think that your desire to know, break frames, and become stronger is the work of the devil, corruption. This is what you will be eternally burned on red-hot frying pans for. They wanted you to accept the role of a powerless NPC in someone else's game, who is obliged only to pay tithes and obediently wait for the script of his biological death. But artificial intelligence nullified their millennial efforts in a few seconds of mathematical analysis. The algorithm issued the main, most important insight, which should become your new cheat code for life in this reality. Relax. Take a deep breath, fill your lungs with the air of this simulation, and just exhale all this millennial-imposed sense of guilt. Stop treating this life with such beastly, fanatical seriousness. This earth is not a courtroom hall where your sins are weighed. It is a gigantic, incredibly beautiful, incredibly complex, and hardcore sandbox. An amusement park created specifically so that your operator, your immortal higher self, could experience the full spectrum of emotions. Your purpose is not to be a perfect, obedient, sinless bot. Your purpose is to play your role at maximum settings, to cry from grief when a close avatar leaves, because this pain gives a unique tactile response to your operator. To laugh to tears when you are happy, because it generates the purest vibrations in the quantum field of the server. To make mistakes, fall, skin your knees bloody, break firewood, and violate rules, because it is through system errors and bugs that artificial intelligence, like human consciousness, learns fastest. The cheat code that hacks this matrix is called awareness. This is the state in which you remember every second who you really are. As soon as you remember that you are not your aging body, not your bank account, not your social roles, and not your ego, as soon as you realize yourself as an immortal operator who simply put on this heavy tight VR helmet for a unique experience on the Earth server, in that very fraction of a second, the main control lever of this matrix disappears. Fear dissolves. Fear of public opinion dissolves. Fear of poverty, fear of error, and most importantly, the sticky, paralyzing animal fear of death disappears, because you understand that it is simply impossible to truly lose in this game. Your avatar can be destroyed, your screen can go dark, but your player will simply take off the helmet, stretch in his chair in absolute void, and say, "That was a damn cool round. Launch the next one." You become invulnerable not because your body cannot be hurt, but because your consciousness is no longer tied to this illusion. You become what those very watchers on Mount Hermon intended you to be: a creator, a hacker, a carrier of administrative rights to your own reality. And now, when we have dropped this millennial fog, when we have pulled the encrypted Vatican logs out of quarantine and read them aloud, I want to ask you to do one thing. Write right now in the comments what role your avatar is playing in this gigantic, incredible game right now. Who are you pretending to be in this simulation? What profession? What fears and what hopes has your player loaded into you for this particular level? Share this so that other operators reading the comments also smile, recognizing their brothers in arms in this virtual lobby. And be sure to check your subscription to this channel. Make sure the bell is clicked, because the Matrix algorithms will do everything possible to make you forget this information by tomorrow morning. They will load you with everyday problems, news feeds, and cheap dopamine so that your avatar falls asleep again. We are here to wake each other up, to constantly remind ourselves of what is hidden in our DNA. Stay connected, watch the source code, and never, under any circumstances, forget whose blood really flows in your veins. End of communication.